Hey everyone, so I'm going to go through the Glarry Violin that I got just today, actually. They were kind enough to send me a violin to test out and to give a review, and yeah, hopefully if you guys think it's worth it, you can purchase it as well. So the very first thing I want to talk about with the Glarry Violin is that it is a beginner violin. Here's what the one that I ordered looks like. So in general, not bad, just upon first glance. There are some things that I'm able to say about the Glarry Violin because I have another violin to compare it to. Otherwise, I probably would have no idea. So this violin that I've been using for years and years and years was fairly expensive, very well made. This one's a Japanese violin. It's a Hiroshi Kono violin, made in 2014. And so I'm going to be using this violin as kind of a comparison and basis for the standards that I would expect for violins. Although I do know that a lot of beginner violins are kind of mass-produced and you know, they're not like handmade like the violin that I have here. So there are going to be some differences, and I want to point those out just because I want this to be an honest review. So the very first thing that I want to point out with this Glarry Violin is the nut right here. So this nut actually protrudes up a bit. You can see that, right? It protrudes up and then the strings rest in there and it kind of dips down where the fingerboard is. Let's compare that to this violin. So here's the nut. And you can see that there's barely a dip there, right? So it's a lot more flush with the actual fingerboard. Okay. Another thing with the nut, I'm going to bring the Glarry one back. Let's take a look at these strings. So you can see that the strings are pretty much like straight down from the peg box. So the strings are a bit closer together, and there's a decent amount of room on either side of the edge here. Let's compare that to the Hiroshi Kono. So you should be able to see that there is a difference here. There's an angle for the outer two strings. Can you guys see that? That being said, there is also wider spacing of the strings. And so the outer strings are actually placed a little bit further out and closer to the edge than the Glarry Violin strings. Now, the way that they do this is they actually make little notches in the nut, and that's just to help set the strings in place and help them from getting like too eroded or anything like that or worn down. Let's take a look at the Glarry again. I'm gonna be doing a lot of this. So you see these are pretty much straight down, and you can even maybe see, you can see the notches a bit clearer here. So the notches that they made on this violin are a bit closer together, whereas these outer two string notches should be a bit closer to the edge, because that actually helps with the distancing and spacing of the strings, and it prevents you from accidentally hitting a string that you did not intend to hit while you were playing. The other thing that is different, let's go ahead and take a look at the bridge, okay? So the bridge is here, this piece right here. If we take a look at it this way, it looks pretty even, right? Like on either side of the bridge, it seems like it's shaped pretty symmetrically. Then let's take a look at this bridge. You should be able to tell actually almost immediately that this is thinner. The thickness of this bridge is different than what is on the Glarry right now. And then the other thing, hopefully you can see, can you tell that it's not symmetrical? That the part of the bridge on this side is actually dips lower than this side. That's actually good, and that's what you want for a bridge. The reason for that is because if you have it symmetrical, like on the Glarry Violin, it's actually going to be harder, again, for you to not accidentally hit strings that you were, not intending to hit when you're playing the violin. When it's angled symmetrically like this, that means you have very little room for error when you're trying to tilt the bow to change strings. The bridge that is on this one was created in order to help mitigate that issue, especially if you're on the E and A strings. Having the E string a bit lower than the A string makes you have to tilt more in order to hit the E string, and it prevents you from accidentally hitting that string when you're not actually intending to. The next thing that is different, and this is not a bad thing at all, the fine tuners. So this violin, I only have one fine tuner, and it's right on the E string, and that is because the E string is so thin and frail. It's much more likely to break if you use the actual pegs to tune it. Pretty much all violins have at least the E string fine tuner. Now, when you have a beginner violin, it is much more common to have the fine tuners on all of the strings. And that's also just to help you learn how to tune the violin properly with both the pegs and with the fine tuners. And again, it kind of helps prevent you from accidentally going too far when turning with the peg and breaking a string. If it's just a little bit of an adjustment that you need, you can use the fine tuners here in order to do that and make sure that your violin is in tune. When it's a more higher end violin, you will just have the E string fine tuner. Okay, other things. So the tailpiece is fine. The chin rest is also fine. I kind of like the pattern here. It's pretty. No issues with this at all. I do also want to mention for the strings. Now, these strings came on the violin. The bridge was separate, so I did have to put the bridge on myself and tune the violin. One of the strings kind of came off, but it's no big deal, really. Just had to put it back on here in order to, attach it and use the fine tuner and things like that. So the thing that I want to mention, a lot of strings, especially for the E string, it comes with a little sleeve. So can you see this little clear thing right here? This little sleeve goes on the E string because, again, the E string is very prone to breaking, and if it's on this bridge without any sort of protection, it's more likely, again, to kind of split and possibly break, which we don't want. So this sleeve is to help prevent against that. Another thing that you can do, instead of having the sleeve here, which most strings provide one sleeve for the E string, that's usually already attached to it. But if you don't have that on the E string, if the strings don't come with it, the bridge sometimes has a little extra protection just on that notch for the E string. And it kind of serves the same purpose. These strings, I am not seeing any kind of sleeve anywhere on the E string. And so there's nothing here to protect the E string. So this is a lot more prone to breaking, unfortunately. So if you're going to get a new bridge anyway, I would just get a bridge that curves, it slants a bit more towards the E string, and also has that little extra layer just to help with your playability and also protect the E string better. So inside the case, Glarry actually does provide this little paper kind of describing the different parts of the violin and the bow and whatnot. A couple things. Tuning pegs is 1N, not 2. And this is not the frog. This is the tip. This is the frog right there. So, Glarry, you gotta fix those. Next up are the bows. So, I'm gonna show the bow that I got with the Glarry Violin, which is this one right here. It feels pretty nice. It's not too heavy or anything. I've played with it a little bit here and there. It feels fine. No real issues. This bow did come with the violin, so, just kind of assume it's more of a beginner student violin bow quality. The rosin itself is pretty tiny that they give you. Let me open it. So it's got a little BB cloth. It's very, very small. It works though. I will say I use this to rosin the Glarry Violin bow for the first time, usually it takes a long time in order to get the rosin kind of caked on the bow and be able to produce a sound on the violin. But this one worked in like maybe 5-10 minutes. It was very easy to use, and it worked really well because I was able to produce sound pretty quickly with this bow and using that rosin. Now, if I want to compare the rosin that Glarry gives to the one that I've had for, like 15 years, this is the difference. So this is a lot bigger. The cloth is a lot bigger, which helps with preventing, the stickiness getting on your fingers, because the rosin is sticky. So with this one, when I was rosining, my fingers were kind of getting and touching the rosin a bit, and they got a little sticky. So I would recommend for Glarry to provide a longer or bigger cloth with their rosin, just to help prevent that issue. Or maybe even providing just a bigger set, like a bigger piece of rosin itself that would last longer. Because the rosin itself is good quality. Again, I was able to rosin that bow without issue, and it was able to rosin it up fast enough for me to play just a couple minutes later. So that's really nice. But this is kind of my standard in terms of rosin. And this rosin is a Perostro rosin, just so you, again, for comparison. And the other rosin that I have that I got recently actually is this one. And this is a Kaplan D'Addario rosin. And again, it's nicely packaged. You're able to hold it and rosin it without your fingers touching the rosin. That's really the biggest thing. I would like to have a rosin, even if it's this, small and compact, I would rather it have a larger cloth or be packaged in such a way where my fingers do not have to actually touch it. Because that is the thing where you get your fingers sticky and you have to wash your hands and do this and that. Like, if you can prevent that, that'd be awesome. Now, another comparison with the bow is the length of the bow. When I compare it with my wooden bow that I have for my other violin, this length from here to here is pretty much the exact same. So that is consistent with like a higher quality, high-end bow. So that's good to know. Again, there's really no issues with this. There's a couple of differences that I noticed. The grip, this black grip here, this is my wooden bow. This is longer, right, than it is here. And the metal part here is a bit longer as well than this one. I will also show you my carbon fiber bow. And you can see the grips are about the same. Let me try to get it like that. The grips are about the same length, but then this metal piece also extends a bit longer than this one. I don't really think that really affects much from what I know, but I'm not a luthier. I'm just going based on the bows that I have and the experience that I have, with my violin and things like that. So in general, the bow itself is fine. I have no qualms about it at all. I think it would work great for beginners. This, I feel like they could do a better job. Just put a different sticker on there. Just put something else on there. Because when you look at this carbon fiber bow, you see how the circle is for that. And you look at my wooden bow, it's the same kind of thing, right? It's got a circle and then a little bit of a bigger ring around it. If the Glarry bow would be able to have something consistent with that, I think that would also make it feel a bit more like professional. But that's just a very small thing. Like, this doesn't really do anything. It's mainly just a marker for your ring finger. So you know how to grip the bow and just make sure that your ring finger is right on that circle. This circle is raised, so it might feel a little weird because these ones are not raised. They're actually inset as part of the frog and this piece of the bow. Same thing for this one, it's more inset. So this one's raised a bit more. Again, not a big deal. It does feel a little weird to me, but I would be able to get used to it pretty quickly. And again, this is just to help mark where your finger is supposed to go when you're playing the violin. Okay, now we're gonna actually play the Glarry Violin. Let's scoot back a little bit. Oh, I need to put the shoulder rest on. That would help, wouldn't it? Let's do that real quick. Now the shoulder rest is pretty easy to put on. And I could probably even make it a bit tighter, but this works pretty well. Just make sure whatever side the chin rest is on, that's the same side that you want the shoulder rest, the part that's closer to the violin, to be. So if you turn it this way, you see how this part's higher? You want to make sure the shorter part is the same side as the chin rest. All right, let's play this. Let's see. It's probably gonna go out of tune, but. Yeah, that's definitely full size. Not bad. Thoughts that I have, just playing through that real quick. Again, the action of the strings is pretty high for beginner violin. I would suggest getting a bridge that's a bit shorter so that the strings are a bit lower and closer to the fingerboard. I would also, for Glarry, I would suggest making these notches a bit further apart and make sure that the outside string notches are closer to the edge, just a little bit, just to also help with people who are trying to play the violin and might continue to hit the wrong strings on accident. I think that would help a ton. Also, try to shave down the nut a little bit because that's raised up quite a bit. Again, I'm only comparing it to the violin that I have here, where everything's a bit more seamless and it's not really like protruding like the Glarry Violin is. And that also kind of helps with the action of the violin because the strings do not start up as high when it's coming straight from the nut as it does on this one. So just some observations there. I think that would help both the student and Glarry, just in terms of making sure that the violin is set up well for people who are going to be playing it. Aside from the action, I do want to mention that the fingerboard was quite dirty. It had a lot of residue on it, so I can kind of show you my little microfiber cloth. You see those marks on there? That was me wiping off the strings, okay? And then the actual part of the fingerboard was that. So I just kind of brought it up here and went all the way up and down and just rubbed off the residue there. My fingers were kind of getting darker and blackened when I was just trying to play it straight up from the case. After I had put the strings on and put the bridge in and everything like that, I noticed that there was a lot of residue on my fingertips. So I would recommend making sure that that is taken care of before you ship it out, or if there is some residue on it, just make sure that people are aware that they should definitely wipe down the violin fingerboard before they start playing, just to help prevent the residue from getting on their fingers. The pegs themselves are okay. I do notice that they slip a little bit while I'm trying to turn the peg. I do see it slowly turning a little bit back. So I'm not really sure the best way to remedy that. It could be that the holes are a tiny bit too big for the pegs. So you might need thicker pegs in order to have that resistance when you're turning and that it stays in. But they are very easy to turn, which is nice because I've had pegs that were not easy tune pegs, and they were quite difficult to actually turn and change the pitch of the strings. So that's kind of a hassle. So this is nice to have something that's pretty easy to turn. All right, I think that's it for my review. I will say straight up that I think this is a good beginner violin. There are definitely some improvements that could be made, that could be on Glarry's side, and it could also be on the user side as well, the buyer side. Again, you could get a different bridge, you can get new strings, a different shoulder rest, new pegs. There's a lot that could be done in order to make the violin a bit easier to play for the person who purchased the violin. I do think it's important for you to have a string shop or person who knows about making violins, someone in your corner, because they are also able to set up the violin to make it easier for you to play. If you don't want to kind of do it yourself, there are shops and people who know how to do it for you. I actually had someone do that in my hometown when I brought my viola from Korea. I purchased it in Korea and I brought it over and they set it up for me, and it was so much easier to play. There's so much you can do with the violin. You can shave the fingerboard down, you can have the bridge be shorter. There's so much that could be done. So don't feel like you buy this and then you're stuck with it and that's all you can do. This is already a very good violin just as is for beginners, and there's definitely some things that you can do to make it even better and easier to play. And again, there's things that Glarry could do on their end as well, but I do know that they have other models that might be higher end and have higher quality. I definitely would recommend this violin for beginners, just with the caveat that there might be some things that you will have to change in order to make it easier for you to play. The last thing that I would want is for someone to get this violin and then feel like they can't play it and they're just not good at violin at all, where you could definitely make it easier to play with a different bridge and new strings and things like that. So that's just my 2 cents. I do really appreciate Glarry for sending me the violin and allowing me to basically provide this honest review to you all. And the link for this violin is in the description, and feel free to also look at the other violins that Glarry has to offer, because there are different products that are a little bit more expensive but might have higher quality. So I would definitely take a look at all of the violins that they have before you make your decision. So yeah, thank you again for watching the video, and I will see you guys again soon. Bye.